They didn't say goodbye. They didn't need to. The silence that followed was tender, not cruel. It was the silence of understanding, of love transformed into memory. The line went quiet, and with it, the sound of their youth. Later, she washed her brushes and stood before the unfinished sea. The blue still wasn't right, but she left it that way. Across the ocean, Leo set his guitar aside and looked out the window, where the city lights flickered like distant constellations. For the first time, he realized that sometimes love doesn't end. It just changes its shape, spreading out across the stars until it becomes the space between them. It was the most painful act of love they had ever committed, letting each other go. The quiet years. Time softened their edges the way the sea softens glass. What once cut and glittered now gleamed with a gentler light. Elara. Paris took her in like a deep breath. In the beginning, she painted to survive the ache. Her studio on Rue de Martyr was a small attic with crooked beams and a window that looked out over slate rooftops. In winter, she painted with gloves on, breath fogging the air. In summer, the light poured in so fiercely she had to tape paper to the panes just to see her colors clearly. Her early canvases still carried traces of the island, the shimmer of heat, the impossible blue of sea against sky. But slowly they faded into something quieter. Her palette turned inward. Soft grays, ochres, the green of remembered mornings. Critics began to call her the painter of echoes. One reviewer wrote that her art felt like listening to silence. Elara smiled at that. She knew exactly what they meant. She taught at a small art school, took walks along the Seine at dusk, and learned to cook lentil soup the way Mark liked it. Mark came into her life like a door quietly opening. An architect with steady hands and kind eyes. He loved precision, balance, the way light played along clean lines. His buildings looked effortless, graceful, grounded. He loved that Elara's world was chaos and emotion, the opposite of his own. She loved that he never tried to fix her sadness, only to make space for it. Their life together was peaceful. They had rituals, Sunday markets, morning coffee by the window, long silences that never felt empty. And yet sometimes when Elara worked late into the night, she would hear the hum of the city beneath her brushstrokes and think it was the sea. Sometimes the wind against the glass sounded like a low guitar chord. She would pause, brush hovering midair, and for one breathless moment, she was back under the island stars, where the air smelled of salt and mango, and laughter carried on the tide. Then Mark would stir in his sleep, and the spell would break. She would rinse her brushes, turn off the light, and remind herself that ghosts, when treated gently, do not haunt, they simply stay near. Leo. Across the sea, Leo's world spun differently. The band that began in smoky bars grew into something real, a name that played festivals, small stadiums, city rooftops. The fame was never dizzying, but it was enough to fill his days and pay for a small house outside Dublin, where the sea could still be heard on clear nights. Their music changed with them. The songs of wild love and heartbreak turned to melodies of patience, of time passing through people like water through stone. Reviewers said Leo's voice had deepened, that it carried the sound of a man who has learned to stay. Claire, the teacher he married, was sunlight after storm, quiet laughter, gentle order. She loved him without trying to possess him. With her, Leo learned that peace could be music too. Their daughter, Ava, was pure motion. She conducted imaginary orchestras from the garden, her curls wild, her eyes reflecting every color of her father's guitars. Sometimes she painted on the walls, swirls of pink and blue that Claire pretended to scold her for. And yet late at night when the house was asleep, Leo sometimes found himself playing without meaning to. Old melodies would rise unbidden, ones he hadn't touched in years. He would stop, hands stilling on the strings, and sit in the half-dark, listening. He told himself it was just habit, but somewhere deep down he knew it wasn't. The years between time passed like a slow tide, quiet, deliberate. Birthdays, exhibitions, albums, seasons. The ache dulled into something tender, like remembering a childhood song, but not all the words. They both thought of each other less often, but more deeply. When they did, it was never with regret, only wonder. Had it really happened? Had they really been that young? That certain? That bright? Neither spoke of it. Mark saw it sometimes in Elara's faraway look when she painted the sea. Claire heard it sometimes in the pauses between Leo's chords. But love, when true, makes room for old ghosts. They lived good lives, quiet, beautiful ones. And then 15 years later, fate, ever patient, ever mischievous, tilted the world again. The lesson of the rain. It was a small gallery in London, tucked between cafes that smelled of espresso and wet pavement. The street outside shimmered with reflections, red taillights, golden windows, the silver trace of rain. Inside, soft jazz wound through the air, mingling with the low hum of conversation and the faint scent of varnish. Elara stood near one of her canvases, a soft abstraction of a night sea, swells of indigo and silver bleeding into one another. The light caught the faint texture of the brushstrokes, giving the illusion of movement, like the sea breathing beneath a moon. She was listening to someone compliment the piece when it happened, the unmistakable sensation of being seen. Not looked at, not admired. Seen. She turned, and time folded in on itself. Across the room, Leo stood near a sculpture of bronze wings, his hands loosely in his pockets. He looked older, yes, lines traced gently around his eyes, but the same quiet steadiness radiated from him, the same light she had once painted again and again without realizing it. His hair had thinned a little, silver at the temples, but his eyes, those eyes, still carried that soft blue, the color of morning before the world wakes. Their gazes met, and for a long heartbeat, the gallery and all its sounds fell away. The world seemed to contract until only they remained, held in that suspended, wordless recognition. She smiled first, tentatively, almost incredulously, and he answered it, not with surprise, but with the calm joy of someone who had always known this moment might come. They didn't rush into an embrace. There were no gasps or tears, just two lives meeting again, acknowledging the quiet gravity between them. Later, they found themselves in a cafe a few doors down. The rain was still coming, steady and silver, streaking the windows like old memories trying to find their way in. The cafe was nearly empty, only the hiss of the espresso machine and the muted murmur of the street outside. They talked easily, as though the years between them had been only a pause, not a distance. He told her about Claire, how they had met during a volunteer project in Devon, how her laughter still caught him off guard, how she loved thunderstorms. He told her about Ava, their daughter, how she danced, how she feared nothing, how she had his curiosity in Claire's grace. She had her first recital last month, he said, a quiet pride threading through his voice. A little trembling at first, but then she just found her rhythm. He smiled, looking down at his cup. I think I finally understand what patience means. Elara listened, smiling. There was no ache in her chest, only warmth. She told him about Mark, about his gentle humor, his love for the sea, how he proposed to her on a cliff in Santorini, as gulls traced circles above them. She spoke of her students, her studio, the slow joy of watching others learn to see. I think, she said softly, I finally learned how to stay still, to let life happen without always trying to capture it. He nodded, eyes thoughtful. You always chase beauty. Maybe now you've learned to let it find you. A silence stretched, but it wasn't fragile. It was full, like the pause between notes in a song that knows where it's going. And you? She asked after a moment, stirring her tea absently, her spoon tracing small circles that glimmered under the light. Are you happy? Leo looked toward the rain-slick glass. Their reflections wavered side by side, blurred by the soft pulse of water and light. He took a breath that sounded like release. Yes, he said finally, deeply. It's different, quieter, but real. She smiled, the kind of smile that came from knowing rather than hoping. And you? He asked in return. More than I ever thought possible, she said. And she meant it. The words settled between them like a benediction. Neither flinched. Neither needed more. He studied her painting again later. The night sea, dark and luminous, still echoing with the mystery she carried. "You know," he said, his voice almost reverent, "you taught me how to see the music in color. I still think about that sometimes. How you used to listen before you painted, as if waiting for the world to hum the first note." She met his gaze, her eyes glinting softly in the dim light. "And you taught me that not all beautiful things are meant to be held forever. Some are meant to be felt deeply, and then they become part of who we are." The rain outside slowed to a whisper. They rose, their movements unhurried, and shared a single umbrella as they walked through the glistening streets. The city glowed around them, puddles like liquid mirrors, streetlights haloed in mist, laughter spilling faintly from a pub doorway. The air smelled of rain and coffee and renewal. At the corner where their paths diverged, they paused. There were no tears this time, no desperate promises, no backward glances heavy with regret. Only gratitude for what had been and what had grown in its wake. "Take care of yourself, Elara," he said quietly. She smiled a little sadly, a little proudly. "I always did, Leo. You just helped me remember how." He watched her walk away, her silhouette dissolving into the London mist, umbrella bobbing slightly as she turned down another street. But he didn't feel loss, only peace, deep and encompassing, like closing the cover of a beloved book. She turned once just before the corner and smiled. It was enough. That night, in her flat overlooking the river, Elara listened to the soft percussion of rain against glass. The city lights shimmered on the water, blurred and gentle. She took out a fresh canvas and began to paint. Not a sea this time, but a horizon where the ocean met the dawn. The colors merged softly, violet into rose, indigo into gold. The in-between moment, when darkness gives way but still lingers, teaching light how to arrive. She didn't sign her name right away. For a long while, she simply sat, brush in hand, letting the colors breathe together. Somewhere deep inside her, a quiet melody played, one she hadn't realized she still remembered. And far away, Leo sat by his daughter's bedside as she slept, humming a tune that had come to him unbidden, wordless and whole. The rain outside tapped gently against the windows, keeping rhythm. The story of Elara and Leo teaches us that love is not always measured by how long it lasts, but by how deeply it shapes us. Some love stories do not end in forever. They end in becoming. Their love had been the soil in which they grew. She into stillness, he into patience. It had taught them both that not every connection must be held to remain real. Some loves burn and fade, others settle quietly into the heart, becoming constellations by which we navigate everything that follows. And somewhere between the rain and the light, both of them knew, without a word, that love, in its truest form, had never left them. It had simply changed shape. It had become the lesson.